Hi, it's Katrina. Trying to bring up artifacts from World War II is no easy feat. Time and the elements make it hard enough. But add to the fact that many vehicles are at the bottom of the sea. It seems practically impossible. But nothing is impossible for billionaires like Paul Allen, who found a lost aircraft carrier, and explorer Victor Vescovo, who has set the world record of going to the deepest parts of the Earth, including the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. The USS Johnston. Have you ever wondered what lies hidden beneath the depths of the Pacific Ocean, holding stories of sacrifice, bravery, and a battle against all odds? It was 2019 when researchers discovered the deepest shipwreck from World War II in the Pacific Ocean. It was the USS Johnston, a destroyer that was built in Seattle in 1942. It measured 376 feet long and had a crew of 327 men. The Johnston sank following an incredible stand against a Japanese fleet. The fighting occurred near the Philippines at Leyte Gulf in 1944. The Johnston was part of a fleet of ships trying to protect U.S. soldiers who were storming the beaches of the Philippines to take control from the Japanese. If the Johnston and the other ships hadn't been in the area, it likely would have been a disaster for the U.S. troops that were storming the beaches. The USS Johnston and their fellow vessels were outnumbered and outgunned. But the officers and crew of these ships weren't afraid, and they took on the Japanese knowing that they were in for a monumental battle. In the end, the USS Johnston was sunk, and many members of the crew, including the captain, went down with the ship. It's said that the Japanese were so impressed with the bravery and tenacity of the USS Johnston and its crew that a senior Japanese naval officer saluted the Johnston and its men as it sank into the Pacific. And when it was discovered, the USS Johnston was some 4 miles under the ocean, making it the deepest shipwreck from World War II to ever be discovered. That is, until 2022, when the Sammy B was discovered in the Philippine Sea at a depth of 22,916 feet. It was found by a team of explorers, funded and led by, guess who? Victor Vescovo. It's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Mac Pike for the generous super thanks. It really helps a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you! The HMS Triumph. Kostas Thokterides is a diver from Greece with a knack for finding sunken ships. It was the summer of 2023 when Thokterides announced that he'd found the wreckage of the HMS Triumph. The Triumph was a British submarine that went missing in the Aegean Sea, which is located between Greece and Turkey. The submarine measured 275 feet in length and was launched in 1938. During its naval career, the HMS Triumph participated in a total of 20 missions. They attacked German and Italian ships, landed British commandos for missions, and rescued Allied soldiers. But the Triumph went missing in 1942 on a special operation. There were over 60 men on board the HMS Triumph at the time, and an Italian pilot claimed that he last saw the submarine near Athens in Greece. So, what happened to the HMS Triumph? Kostas examined the wreckage and determined that a powerful explosion sunk the ship while it was submerged. Kostas discovered the HMS Triumph some 670 feet underwater and said that locating the vessel was the hardest mission he'd ever undertaken in his life. Out of respect for those who lost their lives on the submarine in 1942, he still hasn't revealed the exact location of the ship. The Pacific Lagoon Plains. In 2020, Project Recover aided in the discovery of 2 SBD-5 Dauntless dive bombers and 1 TBM F-1 Avenger. These 3 planes were found while researchers from the University of Delaware and the University of California in San Diego were searching Truk Lagoon in Micronesia's Truk State. A third group involved in the mission was the Bent Prop Project, a private organization of divers, aviators, and historians. Their goal is to find World War II service members who are labeled as missing in action in the South Pacific. The 3 missing planes went down during 1944's Operation Hailstone. This was just one of many important missions by the U.S. military to weaken the Japanese presence in the Pacific Ocean. Operation Hailstone was a 2-day battle that saw more than 50 Japanese ships destroyed and 230 aircraft obliterated. Out of the 230 aircraft lost, 30 were American, including the 2 SBD-5 Dauntless dive bombers and the TBM F-1 Avenger. In the end, some 23 American pilots were lost during Operation Hailstone. The planes were missing for a total of 76 years. The steps to find the planes included researching official reports and reading the memoirs of those who were part of Operation Hailstone. Those involved in this mission also spoke with the residents of the Chuuk state of Micronesia to see what they knew about the planes in the Truk Lagoon. A memoir of one soldier recalled the last location of one of the two SBD-5 Dauntless dive bombers. This gave them an area to begin their search. The search team spent over 1 year investigating some 27 square miles. Many aircraft broke into fragments, so divers were sent down beneath the waves with high-definition cameras. Once they were able to identify pieces of the 3 planes, they turned everything over to the U.S. Defense POW/MIA accounting agency. Locating these 3 aircraft was quite a success. The Gret Collection. During a 2010 train trip from Switzerland to Germany, a German customs official encountered an odd man on the train. He was acting nervously and was pulled aside for questioning. His name was Rolf Nikolaus Cornelius Gret, and his father aided the Nazis during World War II with their stolen artwork. Nazi Germany stole a great deal of artwork from private collections, especially from Jewish families, and some of it was recovered by groups like the Monuments Men. This group was made up of around 345 men and women who were all experts when it came to fine art, but sadly, many pieces were lost during battle or they simply vanished off the face of the earth. German authorities were suspicious of Gret based on his family history and weird behavior. They eventually raided his apartment in Munich, Germany, and what they found was an absolute shock. The apartment itself was full to the brim. Cornelius was something of a hoarder and a recluse. He was a single man that lived alone and probably didn't go out much, seeing that his father was a former Nazi and he had inherited works of art that many people were looking for. Once the police got inside the residence, there were roughly 1,400 framed and unframed works of art from famous artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Renoir. All of the artwork was stacked in a massive pile. Once the stash was discovered, though, everything was taken by the authorities. The German police aren't quite sure about the fate of the artwork due to their laws concerning stolen artwork, but currently the paintings and other works are being kept in a storage facility while a decision is being made. The USS Grayback. Another U.S. Navy submarine that was lost during World War II was the USS Grayback. It went out for a mission on January 28, 1944, but the submarine and its crew of 80 men were missing by March of that same year. The fate of this submarine would be a mystery until some 75 years later, when it was finally uncovered. Launched in 1941, the USS Grayback was one of the most successful submarines that was used by the U.S. Navy during World War II. It was 307 feet long and was responsible for the sinking of 14 ships. The USS Grayback was sent on its 10th war patrol on January 28, 1944. It set sail from Pearl Harbor to patrol the East China Sea. A communication was then received from the USS Grayback in February of that same year. They reported that they'd sunk 2 Japanese Army cargo ships, and at that point, the sub only had 2 torpedoes remaining, so it was ordered to head back to its dock. However, in late February, the submarine reported that it was damaged by enemy aircraft, but they also claimed to have sunk a Japanese naval transport. Then, after that, no other messages were received. The plan was for the USS Grayback to reach the Midway Islands, but unfortunately, the sub never arrived. Records existed from the Japanese military about the sinking of the USS Grayback. Coordinates were recorded and they were reviewed in 1949. Researchers had an idea where the submarine was located in the Pacific. However, the data was incorrect, and a mistake was discovered in 2018. The error completely changed the location by hundreds of miles. When research crews finally located and checked out the wreckage, they noticed that an explosion from a bomb had resulted in its sinking. The bomb hit the submarine's hull, so sadly, there was nothing that could have been done to prevent the tragedy. Operation Smash. D-Day was an ambitious Allied amphibious landing in Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops made the assault on a heavily fortified German coastline. The bravery of the men who stormed the beaches helped turn the tide of the war in Europe. Before D-Day occurred, there was a training mission in motion known as Operation Smash. The purpose of this exercise was to prepare for the storming of the beaches at Normandy. Operation Smash was conducted in April 1944 in Dorset and Studland Bay, a community in southern England along the English Channel. Part of the training exercise was deploying tanks from a vessel where they'd be in the water and then land on the beach, providing much-needed support to the troops. However, when 32 tanks were deployed, 6 or 7 of them were overtaken by the sea. Water rushed into the tanks and they were all sent to the bottom. Sadly, 6 men lost their lives in the process. What's interesting about this training exercise is that the records of the lost tanks and the men who died were kept top secret for a period of time. But the training exercise allowed officers the opportunity to avoid this mistake on D-Day. To this day, the tanks are underwater off the coast of Studland. They serve as reminders that without the sacrifice of these brave men, we may not have won the war. The Adriatic Sea Bombers. An amazing discovery was made just last year in 2022. Research crews from the Pentagon and the University of Delaware searched the Adriatic Sea near Italy for some missing B-24 Liberator bombers that vanished during World War II. This search included the co-founder of Project Recover, an organization dedicated to finding and recovering the 80,000 U.S. servicemen who have been listed as missing during conflicts dating back to the Second World War. They found 3 of 5 B-24 Liberator bombers that vanished without a trace during the 1940s. These researchers combed some 24 square miles in the Adriatic for the wreckage of the bombers, and after a few weeks of searching, 3 of the 5 planes were discovered. Researchers were then able to send unmanned vessels underwater to get the plane numbers off the wreckage to identify them as the missing B-24s. This was incredible news for the families of the men on the 5 B-24 bombers, as they'd been listed as missing for 80 years. It's believed that all 5 of the planes had been damaged during a bombing mission, and unfortunately, they never made it back to their airbase in Italy. The USS Albacore. The wreckage of a submarine was found off the coast of Japan just last year in 2022. The remains were examined and they were confirmed to belong to the USS Albacore. It was a submarine that disappeared off the coast of Japan on November 7, 1944. The USS Albacore was reported overdue when it didn't return to base. The mystery of the fate of the ship has haunted many for decades. The USS Albacore had a crew of 85 men when it went missing. It was commissioned in 1942, and the submarine measured 311 feet in length. It was also recognized as an asset for the U.S. Navy. It was responsible for sinking at least 10 enemy ships during the war and was considered one of the best at getting the job done. The victories led to the USS Albacore receiving 4 Presidential Unit citations and 9 battle stars. Sometime on or before November 7, 1944, the U.S. Albacore hit an enemy mine while submerged. The damage caused the submarine to sink, taking all 85 men with it to a watery grave. The sub and its crew were listed as missing for many years. Families were understandably distraught because nothing was on file concerning the fate of the men. The wrecked submarine was then identified by a Japanese research group in 2022. The families of the 85 men who went missing were notified, and at the time of this video, some 76 living relatives of the 85 have been contacted. The U.S. Navy released a statement after the discovery of the USS Albacore, and in it they explained that the wreck site represents the resting place of the sailors who gave their lives in defense of the nation. The Albacore was one of 52 submarines that were lost during World War II, and now various research groups are working to make sure that all of the missing subs are located. Flight 19. A routine training flight took place on December 5, 1945 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers departed from the Naval Air Station. They were to take part in a 3-hour training exercise known as Navigation Problem Number 1. During the mission, they were ordered to follow a flight path and at some some point successfully dropped their torpedoes. The 5 planes were known as Flight 19, and their tale is a mystery for the ages. The flight path was triangular in shape, and the 5 planes were sent over the infamous Bermuda Triangle, a section of the North Atlantic Ocean where planes and ships have disappeared without a trace. For those of you who don't know, this area is the size of the state of Alaska, which is huge. The training mission was going smoothly for Flight 19, but everything quickly turned into chaos. The lead pilot for the mission discovered that his compass wasn't working. Plus, the weather conditions had become difficult with rain, wind, and heavy cloud cover. One of the pilots on this mission would then radio the base with the following message: "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." All 5 of the planes were lost, so the flight leader made the decision to fly the group northeast, which would have taken them over the middle of nowhere in the Atlantic. They should have tried flying west, and perhaps they would have made it to Florida. Aircraft were sent out to search for the missing Flight 19 planes. One of the aircraft on the search mission apparently exploded and crashed into the ocean. It was another tragedy on a rather difficult day. 300 boats and aircraft were sent out to find Flight 19, but they searched 300,000 square miles and found nothing. A Navy lieutenant involved in the search said they just vanished. "We had hundreds of planes out looking, and we searched over land and water for days, and nobody ever found the bodies or any debris." There have been attempts since World War II to find Flight 19. In 1991, a discovery was made off the Fort Lauderdale coast. Plane debris from the wreckage was found, but unfortunately, it wasn't connected to Flight 19. Recently, though, a group claimed to have found a debris field in the ocean, and they believe it could be linked to the famous Flight 19. But to this day, the debris that's been found is still up for debate. The Bismarck. The Bismarck, Germany's pride and top battleship, embarked on its maiden voyage in 1939, ready to be the sea's most formidable weapon. This behemoth of the waves was an imposing fortress, boasting unparalleled firepower. It also held the distinction of being Germany's first battleship since World War I. Stretching over 800 feet, it housed a crew of over 2,000 officers and enlisted men. In the spring of 1941, the Bismarck was entrusted with a monumental mission to intercept and eliminate ships ferrying precious supplies from the United States to Great Britain. This operation, codenamed Rheinübung, set the stage for a high-stakes confrontation. 10 days into its mission, the Bismarck found itself facing off against 2 British battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Hood, in the turbulent waters off the Denmark Strait, nestled between Iceland and Greenland. Caught off guard, a furious battle ensued, and the HMS Hood, once the pride of the British fleet, suffered grievous damage and met a watery grave. However, the Bismarck wasn't left unscathed. The relentless exchange of fire left the German battleship vulnerable, with water breaches and oil leaks. So, in a desperate bid for survival, the Bismarck's captain charted a course back to France, which was under German occupation at the time, for crucial repairs. As the Bismarck struggled to reach the sanctuary of French waters, British ships, alerted to the weakened adversary's whereabouts, swiftly moved to close in for the kill. Bomber planes joined the relentless pursuit, raining destruction upon the vessel. Then, in the final act, the HMS Dorsetshire delivered a decisive blow, launching 2 torpedoes that found their mark. The Bismarck, once a symbol of German naval might, succumbed to the relentless assault, sinking into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean and claiming the lives of around 2,000 crew members. In 1989, the resting place of the Bismarck was unveiled, some 400 miles off the coast of the French city of Brest. The mighty ship now rests a staggering 15,700 feet below the surface. This titan of the seas, which endured only 10 days in service, took nearly half a century to reveal its submerged secrets to the world. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
ME-109 Messerschmitt plane. When 14-year-old Danish student Daniel Ramm Christensen was doing some research for a project, he stumbled upon an amazing discovery. He had to do an assignment on World War II, so his dad suggested they look for artifacts on the fields of their farm. Daniel had grown up with his grandfather's stories from World War II, but some were true and some weren't. His grandfather had told him of the time a German plane had crashed in one of the fields in 1944. No evidence of this remained in 2017, but Daniel and his father went out for fun with the metal detector. They got a strong signal and borrowed a neighbor's excavator. 20 feet below the surface, they found the remains of an Me-109 Messerschmitt plane, broken up into thousands of pieces. The engine was intact along with live ammunition. They also found the remains of the pilot, including his tattered clothes and personal items such as his wallet. Bomb disposal experts came and everything else was taken over by the proper authorities. Daniel's father was very surprised that such a large piece of history was hidden underground. I think Daniel wins the record for best school project, and it turns out his grandfather was telling the truth after all. Hidden battlefields. All over Europe, the remnants of long-ago battlefields lie in wait for archaeologists to uncover. For years, they've remained untouched, but they're a treasure trove of information, archaeologically speaking. There are tons of spots for further research, such as bombed areas and supply reserves. Researchers are hoping that investigating some of these long-lost battlefields in northwestern Europe could help teach us more about German military strategies. David Passmore is a specialist in conflict archaeology at the University of Toronto in Mississauga, and he is excited. He says, the archaeology of World War II has only recently begun to be formally investigated, even though we know a lot about its history. That's why he and his team have been performing surveys of battlefields that were integral to the war from 1944 to 1945. These surveys will likely be integral to constructing an accurate picture of how armies fought on the battlefield. One key feature of these investigative trips has been the further knowledge uncovered about German logistical depots. These provide insights into the manner by which German armies prepared for attack, as well as how they fell to the Allied powers. In fact, by cross-referencing data, they've been able to uncover just how powerful the Allied attacks were. Another major discovery was the lost battlefield of World War II. It was the site of the largest battle between Australian and Japanese forces, but for many years, no one even knew where it was. After 68 years, it was finally found located in the jungles of Papua New Guinea by former Australian Army Captain Brian Freeman, with help from the Alola people native to the area. Villagers avoided the site of the battlefield, claiming it was haunted by the spirits of those killed in battle. Metal detectors picked up rifles, ammunition, and helmets, helping them to locate remains of fallen soldiers in the hopes that they can now be identified and returned to their families. The fighting lasted 4 days and 4 nights, with casualties on both sides. The first priority is to repatriate the fallen soldiers and honor their memory by restoring the battlefield and the field hospital to the conditions they were in 68 years ago. HMAS Sydney. When the HMAS Sydney, one of the most powerful ships among the Australian Navy, was sailing in the waters around Western Australia in 1941, it encountered the HMS Cormoran. Sadly, the Sydney was under the impression that the Cormoran was a Dutch freighter, so it trusted its appearance. But then, once they got close, the Cormoran opened fire. It was actually a German raider. Both ships were sunk in the ensuing battle, but most aboard the Cormoran survived the attack. However, the clearly superior Sydney sank, taking its 645 sailors with it. Survivors said the Sydney was struck by a torpedo, causing the ship to sink rapidly, but the Australian public had long since suspected more wrongdoing due to the shock of one of their greatest ships being sunk. The remains of the HMAS Sydney weren't uncovered until 2008, when a group of explorers found both ships 14 miles apart from one another, about 8,000 feet under. Their locations confirm the German account of the story, meaning that there were no war crimes to report. Marine archaeologist Mac McCarthy said that it was very important for archaeology to help people learn about what happened and that it could bring some closure. It's still a mystery as to why the Sydney would approach an unknown vessel, giving up its advantage. Be sure to subscribe if you are new here and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on the latest videos. YP389. The story of the YP389 didn't end well, but it is a reminder of the desperation and brutality that comes about during wartime. In the beginning of 1942, most of the Navy's ships were moved to the Pacific front of the war, but this left the Atlantic coast wide open to attack from German U-boats. Since all of their good ships were stationed elsewhere, the Navy tried to make do with what they had. Thus, they constructed, among others, the YP389, which was pretty much a fishing vessel with a gun attached. However, this wasn't enough to stop the Germans. In June of 1942, the YP389 was patrolling off the coast of North Carolina, and it was pretty much a sitting duck. A U-boat approached, and when the sailors aboard the YP389 spotted it, they returned fire. However, it wasn't strong enough to face up to a U-boat, and it was shelled into oblivion. 6 of the 24 sailors aboard were killed, and it sank down to the bottom of the sea. However, in 2009, a group of researchers from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration discovered the location of its demise. The sunken vessel is around 300 feet underwater in the so-called graveyard of the Atlantic, which is the final resting place of a great many Allied ships who fell to German naval power in the Battle of the Atlantic. Hopefully, these remains will help researchers and archaeologists retell the story of this pivotal battle. Desert Training Center. Did you know that the largest training ground in the history of warfare was in the United States? Located in the Mojave Desert, the Desert Training Center, or DTC, also known as the California-Arizona Maneuver Area, was the training spot for some 1 million soldiers in between 1942 and 1943, preparing soldiers for World War II. It was also gigantic. It was about 28,000 square miles, and its severe desert weather made General George Patton think that it would be a perfect place to prepare soldiers for battles in North Africa. If they could fight in this terrain, he thought, they'd be able to fight anywhere in the world. Nowadays, since solar power is becoming a big deal, many archaeological surveys are being conducted before anything gets lost. What they're finding is astonishing. They've already found large defense buildings and remains of campgrounds that were intended to house around 15,000 people. Archaeologists have also found terrain maps and the hill Patton used to observe tank maneuvers called the King's Throne. This site demonstrates how the American military developed tactics and fortitude, and now the challenge is to sort through all the information. Plutonium. In 2004, crews responsible for cleaning up nuclear waste in Hanford, Washington, uncovered the remains of a rusty safe lodged in a trench. When they opened it up, they found that there was a gallon-sized bottle which contained the remnants of weapons-grade plutonium. Even though it's only a small amount, it could do serious damage. As it happens, this plutonium is probably the second oldest specimen of non-natural plutonium that humanity has ever created, the first oldest going to a lab at UC Berkeley. During World War II, there were 4 nuclear reactors that were powerful enough to create weapons-grade plutonium, and 3 of them were housed in Hanford. In fact, Hanford was used as a nuclear repository throughout the entirety of the Cold War as well, which meant that the town was absolutely chock full of nuclear waste. Because of this, people have been trying to clean up the place for many years, with varying degrees of success. But how did researchers know that this sample of plutonium was probably the second oldest in the world? Science tells us that as time passes, plutonium decays back into uranium. Researchers were able to investigate the ratio of plutonium to uranium inside of the nuclear slurry. This ratio told them that they were dealing with a sample that was around 62 years old, which places it pretty early in nuclear history. In fact, through investigative work, they also found that it was probably used as a test of the Hanford site's capabilities. World War II bombs. Despite having come to an end more than 70 years ago, the consequences of the Second World War can still be seen around the world. There are countless artifacts such as planes, ships, tanks, and all kinds of things left hidden and forgotten underground or in the sea. More recently, some of the many bombs that were unaccounted for have been washing ashore. They can come in all different shapes and sizes and are often mistaken for other things by people walking along the beach. The frightening thing is that these are still active and able to explode. No one knows for sure how many there are out there waiting to be washed up, but to give you an idea, there are an estimated 1.6 million metric tons of conventional and chemical ammunitions lying on the seabed just in German waters alone. This is made up of over 1 million items, including grenades, detonators, giant aerial bombs, 15-kilo shells, and many more. This is just a fraction of what can be found all over the world. With the way ocean currents carry objects around, there is the potential for these items to show up virtually anywhere. It is not uncommon for objects like these to wash up on European beaches. There are many examples of bombs showing up on French and British coastlines, but in 2015, there was even one that washed up further on Paso Grill Beach, Florida. It was about 4 feet long, covered in barnacles, with a cylindrical body and cone shape on one side. The beach was evacuated, and since it was too risky to move it, it was detonated on site. In 2019, a group of kids in Boca Raton were digging around and found a very interesting-looking device, which turned out to be a World War II Mk-43 practice bomb, most likely from the Army airfield. Thousands of practice bombs left over from World War II are also found across the world every year, so if you are ever at the beach and see something suspicious, be sure to contact local police. Plane crash. Students from Winchester University in England recently found the remains of a Hawker Hurricane fighter plane in the middle of a field. Even though the Hawker Hurricane was eventually overtaken by the submarine Spitfire in the public eye, the Hawkers were actually responsible for about 60% of the damage inflicted on the Germans' air fleet, the Luftwaffe. These planes fought everywhere throughout the battles of World War II. Students, all undergraduates, found the site of the crash in Wickham, and they determined that the plane probably crashed sometime around November 1940. They found a ton of interesting stuff there. In the wreckage, they uncovered instruments that could have been used in the cockpits, buttons used to fire ammunition, it was on the setting set to fire, and an identification plate that said it was flown by a Hugh Desmond Clark. They also found the harness release, the last thing that its pilot would have touched before parachuting away. The excavation took around 3 days, and it has to be an illuminating experience for students of archaeology. Given that it was just one aircraft, the site tells a very particular historical story. Apparently, this plane was flown by Clark while he was in the process of attacking enemy planes on November 1st, 1940. He survived this battle and only retired officially from the Royal Air Force in 1960, where he'd earned the title of Wing Commander. Now these students are hoping to find his relatives and learn more. Ghost Fleet of Truk Lagoon. Located in Micronesia, Truk Lagoon, also known as Chuk Lagoon, is home to one of the world's largest ship graveyards from World War II. In an attack known as Operation Hailstone, the Allies launched a surprise attack on one of Japan's largest naval bases for 3 days. Over 60 Japanese ships were sunk along with 275 airplanes, and many of the wrecks are perfectly intact. Thousands of Japanese sailors lost their lives and still remain in their watery graves. It was later rediscovered in 1980 by diver Klaus Lindemann. For the most part, people left the wrecks untouched as they were said to be haunted, also because there are thousands of sunken bombs. The ships were full of cargo including aircraft, weapons, tanks, bulldozers, railway cars, torpedoes, and all kinds of other artifacts. It is now a protected area and a tropical paradise full of ocean life. This legally protected underwater museum is open to divers, and you can swim around the sunken submarines, but be careful not to wake the dead. Among the wreckage, you can see a perfectly upright tank, as well as 2 oddly placed gas masks. Its popularity has grown, and it is now considered one of the top wreck diving destinations in the world. You can go on a 7-day charter trip for $3,195. Air raid shelters. Before World War II began, British officials took steps to install air raid shelters underneath the ground. They were pretty afraid of the air raid tactics that the Germans and Italians had utilized in the Spanish Civil War, and clearly the British were thinking ahead. Between 1940 and 1941, the Germans were relentless with their air bombing tactics. The Germans called it the Blitzkrieg, and it's now become synonymous with absolute incessant form of attack. But whatever became of those air raid shelters? Most of the hatches that lead down into the shelters are now covered with gardens, garages, you name it, forgotten remnants of the war. But archaeologists want more. In 2005, workers at a London elementary school discovered that there was a giant air raid shelter right underneath a sports field on school property. In fact, some documents suggest that there are 12 more there as well. And when archaeologists came from University College London, they were amazed. Everything inside of the air raid shelter is a remnant of the 1940s. It's pretty big too. Apparently the shelter was constructed to hold about 50 people total. And when you think about how many of these shelters must have been around, it's clear that London was pretty well protected. There were also math problems written on a wall inside of the shelter, indicating that students were continuing their studies underground. Thanks for watching! Which discovery did you think was the most interesting? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more like this. See you later! Bye!